Just finished Module 2 of the AWS Technical Essentials, and there was a lot more in this module than I originally expected there to be. The first few lessons were talking about EC2 and compute, and I thought it was just going to be more of a general refresher on computing, but it did go into more detail on quite a few things that I wasn't familiar with before, specifically the Amazon machine images, which is basically just a template for a virtual machine, and the virtual machines being called Elastic Cloud Computing, or EC2. It seems like there's going to be a lot of common ideas and technologies that they just spun off with a different name, so it should be fairly easy to relate back to a lot of those core concepts. The 3 billing types were, I won't say interesting to learn about, but good to know. The on-demand, just pay when it's on, reserving for 1 or 3 years with a discount, and then the spot instances were interesting in learning how those worked. Beyond that, there was talk about the different compute types like serverless and containers. I hadn't had much experience with containers before, so I did some extra research into that, and I'm still working on the analogy, but the way I understand it is that containers are kind of like a palette, a moving palette of sorts. They share the OS and the kernel of the underlying system that they're installed on. So just the same way that a pallet is moved by a forklift, no matter what forklift you use, that pallet is always going to move the exact same way. It's going to behave the same way. You're going to get the same reliable results. Differs from a virtual machine in that a virtual machine is more self-contained. So if you have Windows, you might have a cardboard box, or Mac is a suitcase, Linux is a metal shipping container. They're all self-contained, and what you put inside of those depends on what container you have, and none of those will be moved just by a forklift like the containers. So still working on that analogy, but that's kind of how it makes sense in my brain. So from containers, obviously make the jump then to Dockers and Kubernetes, and I did some more digging into that. Docker is just going back to the palette analogy, it tells you what is on the palette. Say you've got this application with these dependencies, or maybe you have 2 spools of wire and 4 bricks or whatever. And it just tells you what's on that specific palette, and then Kubernetes acts as the orchestrator. So Kubernetes will say, okay, I need 4 of these pallets over in room number 3, and I need 2 more pallets over in room number 4, and it just tells where to go, and then adds some additional details to the container, such as if you need additional computing or memory or things of that nature. The final thing they talked about was serverless computing, and that just goes back for me to the idea of platform as a service. You don't manage any of the actual infrastructure, you just have an operating system to work on. It's a little bit farther towards the software as a service because you don't have a strict operating system, but it allows you to just run specific bits of code with a trigger. So kind of like an if-then, but for infrastructure, which was kind of cool. So that was all interesting to learn about, and then there were some more aspects of the AWS Lambda service, which falls under that serverless computing type, and specifically in the naming of the different functions. There's a lot of terms in there that I need to dig further in, but on the whole, I was very interested to learn on everything in that module, and I am curious to see what comes up in the next one. So, later.